Welcome back to the OurView Podcast. This episode is part of our Mental Health Monday series. These episodes will highlight topics related to mental health. The episodes will sometimes share the stories of those who have been medically diagnosed with mental health disorders, and other episodes in the series will share interviews with mental health professionals who will provide an overview of the different types of mental health diagnoses and their treatment options. These episodes are intended to be informational and educational only. It is not medical advice, and any information within these episodes is not intended to diagnose. We encourage you to always seek the guidance of your medical physician or clinician for any decisions regarding your medical needs and conditions. Welcome back to the OurView Podcast. On today's episode, I welcome my guest, Troy Campbell. Join our conversation as we discuss anxiety disorders. I would like to welcome everyone back to another episode of the OurView Podcast, where we raise awareness, educate, and change the tone of conversation about disabilities. This episode is a part of our Mental Health Monday series, where we will be discussing topics related to mental health. On today's episode, I would like to welcome my guest, Troy Campbell, to the podcast. And today's discussion, we are going to be talking about anxiety disorder. So, welcome to the podcast. I am happy to have you on today.
Thank you. Thank you for
Um,
asking me.
yeah, if you could you just introduce yourself and tell us who you are, what you do, and something fun that you like to do?
Um, so, my name is Troy Campbell, and I am a licensed clinical social worker, and I work at a federally qualified health center where work with behavioral health clients, mental health clients on a variety of different disorders. Um, but my two specialties, the things that I focus the most on, are trauma related disorders and anxiety disorders. And a fun thing that I like to do. I have two hairless cats at home,
Really?
and yes, they are different from most cats because most cats they don't want to have anything to do with you. These two cats are like little kids, and they lay on you, and they climb on you, and they do all types of things. And so I spend a lot of time, um, working with their using their purrs as my anxiety reducers.
Yes.
They'll lay in my head, lay on my neck, and lay on whatever part of my body that they want to lay on to get warm because they have no hair. So that's one of the funnest things that I like to do because it is somewhat therapeutic. So
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. Animals in general, I think, are very therapeutic and very helpful, and that's great. I've never known anyone to have hairless cats. I've seen them and heard of them, but so that is a really fun fact. So thanks for sharing that. So as I mentioned on this episode, we are going to be talking about anxiety disorders. So if you could you tell us what anxiety disorders are and how many types of anxiety disorders exist according to the DSM-5?
well, the DSM-5 um, kind of separated the three different types of anxiety disorders. In the DSM-4, anxiety disorders that include obsessive compulsive disorder, post traumatic stress disorder, and other the trauma related disorders, they were all categorized in one category of anxiety disorders. But now anxiety disorders have their own separate category, and anxiety disorders, um, the main ones are agoraphobia, which is basically an anxiety disorder that causes a person to have a fear of going out into public spaces. um, similar to social phobia, social anxiety disorder, but it's different from a social anxiety disorder or social phobia because it's debilitating. It stops a person from being able to actually uh, participate in normal living situations because the anxiety is so overwhelming. Um, then there are panic disorders that are not associated with agoraphobia. And panic disorders are basically the same thing as an agoraphobia, but it's not. It's based on um, a specific thing that you panic over. Instead of just like an overwhelming general, when you anything that goes outside is dangerous, is scary for me. So that's kind of one of the differentiations between the two. Then there's social anxiety disorder that's specific, and that's the one that's it really is based on you can't be in crowded spaces, you can't be around people. You're That's the only anxious thing that you have about it. It's just that you go out into public places around people, and those feelings, those overwhelming feelings of anxiety start to overcome you just being around people. And then there's separation anxiety disorder. You usually see that with children in the early stages of development when they are having a difficult time being away from their parents, especially when they say go to preschool or to kindergarten. But it also appears in adults later in life. It's usually related to some sort of an attachment trauma that's happened sometime in their lifetime, where they have a difficult time feeling comfortable by themselves and away from the people that make them feel safe. So separation anxiety can exist along the lifespan. It doesn't necessarily have to be um, um, it doesn't necessarily have to be a child. And then there's the one that is not generally um, looked at as an anxiety disorder, but it's included in the DSM-5, which is selective mutism. It's basically when a person has an overwhelming experience in their life, and then all of a sudden they just stop talking. It usually appears in infancy, childhood years, or adolescence, but those um, those are very rare conditions. It happens than people think, but they are pretty rare in comparison to the other anxiety disorders. Um, and then the last one is generalized anxiety disorder. You just have generalized anxiety about everything in every area of your life, your social life, your school life, your home life. I mean, just things, excessive worry all the time. Generalized anxiety disorder. That's the one that's most commonly diagnosed as an anxiety disorder, just as a catch all. A lot of doctors, medical doctors, use it as a catch all, generalized anxiety disorder, because technically that's all it is. You have a
Mhm.
generalized anxiety about everything. So,
Yeah, one of the things that you and I talked about in our emails back and forth with each other was how the COVID-19 pandemic has led to an increase of people developing symptoms of anxiety disorders. Can you talk about that and how that can occur due to the pandemic, and especially because of the isolation of sheltering at home and all of those kinds of things that we now have to do?
yeah, uh, the the thing that I see most common um, is because there is a generalized anxiety diagnosis based on a medical condition, like a fear of a medical condition, right? And so you see that a lot. People's fear of contracting the COVID-19 virus, people's fear of um, being exposed to the virus. That is the thing that I see most often. They come into my office and they say, I never had anxiety before, but I'm waking up and I can't breathe. My heart is beating 100 miles per hour. My hands are sweating. I feel like I'm having a heart attack. And you know, we never want to deter people from seeking medical attention for those feelings, because pain in the chest or feeling like you're having a heart attack is always an important thing to explore medically. But what you're seeing is there's a lot of that related to anxiety attacks, panic attacks, or whichever one. There is a difference between anxiety attack and panic attack. Anxiety attack is something that comes on gradually. Panic attack is something that comes on suddenly, and you have no idea where it came from. So you um, those individuals are coming into my office frequently now. Just about every day, I'm getting a new person calling in and saying, "Hey, I'm having anxiety," and it's generally related to the fact that they don't have any idea what's going to happen next. The isolation, the quarantine, the uncertainty of vaccinations and the virus and how the world is if it's going to return back to normal. Those things are all creating issues where people are experiencing some form of anxiety. The I Most people don't realize that anxiety, the general consensus in the behavioral health community is that anxiety is basically the fear of the unknown, right? Is the fear of the unknown, and you have no idea what's going to happen next. Something horrible is going to happen. I don't know what it is. I'm just going to sit there, and this is how my body's going to respond. Um, and those responses, those physical responses that you're having, are based on your body's biological responses to um, things that might be a threat to them. So the amygdala, the person part of your brain, the part of the brain that's designed to help keep you alive, that's basically what's driving those reactions in your anxiety. So the heart palpitations, the increased respiration, the sweating palms, the sometimes even you start having memory lapses because you have an overwhelming flood of neurotransmitters and um, uh, chemicals going through your body. So that's all based on these types of fears that people are having in this pandemic. And the more we're isolated, the more people are kept in their houses and not able to go out and socialize and connect with their support groups, the support networks like they used to have prior to the pandemic, the worse it tends to get. So we have an escalation of anxiety, fear of the unknown, and depression because that overwhelming sadness that people are having. So
Yeah, I'm so happy that you wanted to talk about that, because it's so true that um, in the present day there's so much that is unknown about pretty much every part of people's lives, their jobs and finances, and just like you said, in the loss of even the loss of friends and family to the virus that was, that's still very present. And having that anxious feeling, that uneasy feeling, and fear of what is to come, and how things will go from here on out is something that a lot of people are definitely experiencing, for sure. I know you talked about each of the anxiety disorders. Can you can you talk a little bit more about the symptoms that are associated with some of the disorders?
yeah, those are some of the things that I just mentioned.
Mhm.
Those feelings of so the thing that usually comes up, uh, people describe most commonly happens um, with an anxiety disorder is that fear, the overwhelming fear that something really bad is going to happen. It's like that feeling of impending doom. And so when that happens, especially when you have fear, or am I going to contract this virus? Am I going to die from this virus? Am I going to be passed over, for a vaccine for this virus? That type of thing starts coming up. Those physiological responses are the ones that are the most um, noticeable. Usually, people will start describing that they have a tingling sensation on their skin. They have uh, a feeling that they are suffocating because they're having a hard time breathing. They can't catch their breath. Usually, it's a hyperventilation. Um, then you have the people who have the racing heartbeat. They have racing thoughts. That goes along with the fear of the unknown and the overwhelming feeling of doom and gloom. The racing thoughts, um, and most of these anxiety disorders have time frames, right? That are associated with how they're diagnosed. Usually, for example, a generalized anxiety disorder, to be diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, you had to have had the symptoms of the anxiety disorder, plus it causing some sort of um, disruption to areas of your life. or living pieces of your life, whether it's in your home, in your relationships, at your work. There has to be some disruption as a result of those symptoms that last for 6 months or more. That's generally how the generalized anxiety disorder is diagnosed. If it's less than that, many doctors will just say, you're dealing with anxiety, just diagnose you with a simple anxiety disorder so that they can give you medication. In many cases, they give you anti-anxiety medication. That's
Hmm.
kind of how they get away with doing it because they have to have a diagnosis code to do that. But in order to fit the diagnostic criteria, there are time frames and specific uh, requirements, either age requirements or time frame. It's usually 6 months or more. The symptoms exist or persisted, and they're causing dysfunction in your life.
Yes.
And there's other symptoms that are related to what I talked about. Constantly feeling irritable. That can be interchangeable with depression and anxiety, but irritability and feeling edgy, really like restless and they can't sit still. You'll see a lot of people who they'll shake their legs. You notice they're rocking their legs repeatedly because it's that inability to sit still. They're very restless. You can even have things like muscle aches. You can have insomnia. That's a really common one with anxiety. People can't sleep because their brains are going 150 miles per hour all the time, and so when they're trying to sleep at night, they can't because their body is too amped up. So that's the restlessness, edginess, and that feeling of you just can't sit still. So those are other symptoms that tend to coexist with those other physiological responses that I talked about earlier.
Yeah, I think thank you for sharing that because I always say that like things look different for people. They can present themselves as different symptoms. So, something like you said, insomnia, where people just think, "Oh, I can't sleep. Oh, I'm just I drank coffee a little too late or something like that." It could very well be symptoms of anxiety and just like you said, the body being too amped up to just relax and go to sleep and
Mhm.
and having leg cramps or muscle cramps and things like that. It just really it can present itself in many different ways. So it's really good to mention that type of symptom that can be related to anxiety.
Yeah. So many people who have anxiety challenges um, will have gastrointestinal issues, whether it's diarrhea or nausea or constipation. Um, and it's because your body is diverting certain resources that it usually uses to survive to certain parts of your body that allow for you to fight, flight, or flee, whatever thing that, or fight, flee, fight, flight, or freeze with regard to the thing that you feel that's dangerous. People say, look at people who they say, well, he's catatonic or he's frozen like deer in the headlights type of thing, and people think that that's some sort of severe mental illness, and many times it's just that they're so afraid that the body shuts down. So those different types of things can come up with anxiety as well, because you actually become overwhelmed with fear of the unknown, that the body starts acting like and pretending like it needs to make it and keep it so that it survives and doesn't die, and it starts doing all these reactions just like if you were running from a tiger out in the jungle someplace. So um, you have all these reactions. People say, I got so scared now I have to go to the bathroom. That's because the body's reacting to the fear, and
Mhm.
that's part of the anxiety as well. So
The body and the brain are amazing. Like it's just it it really is because it's just it's the example you just used of like I got so scared I have to go to the bathroom now, and it's
Mhm.
just like it's your body's way of reacting to the fear. And um like the constipation, it's your body's reaction to holding on to everything, to the nutrients that that
Mhm.
you might need to survive. So it's
But
just really to think that your body knows that something is presenting itself as a danger to you, and
Mhm.
you and the way it responds to it. It's amazing how that happens. Wow.
Survival mode. That's all it is. Your body's trying to survive.
So our last question for this episode is, what are some risk factors that can increase the potential of someone developing an anxiety disorder?
Well, there are several risk factors that are important, and I'll give a couple or a few. One, many people don't talk much about adverse childhood experiences. Cases, the Kaiser Permanente study from 1995 to 1997 that basically researched the effect of 10 specific adverse childhood experiences that a person can go through by the time they're 18 years old. Um, and certain things can come out of that, from physiological responses to psychological responses. If a person grows up in an environment and they have four or more ACE um, events, adverse childhood experiences, their risk factors for anxiety disorders and depression increase dramatically. Because if you're living in a constant fear as a child, you will sometimes grow up, and that will carry over into your adulthood, your adult life. So one of the risk factors. The other risk factor is, people talk, are mental health disorders genetic? Well, I wouldn't say they're quote unquote genetic, but there are genetic markers and there's some genetic predisposition for certain mental health disorders. And if you sometimes it's based on the DNA sequencing, and sometimes it's based on the environment that the parents may have presented for the child as a result of their anxiety. For example, if a mom consistently and dad consistently have challenges with poverty and job loss and things like that growing up, and they present with an anxious disposition all the time, the child will pick that up as being a normal response to adverse experiences. So when they get older, um, they are at risk of developing the same type of challenges when they get older, because that's what they know as a coping mechanism. So when they become an adult and then they are exposed to similar challenges or even lesser challenges, they get a flat tire, or something like that, and they're on their way to work and they don't want to get in trouble. Their response is panic. Their response is, I'm going to get in trouble because I'm going to lose my job like my dad did when I was 5 years old. And so those risk factors can both be physiological and environmental, based on um, based on the person, or not the person's going to go on and develop, these disorders, because that's what was going on in their genetic marker within their parents or in their lineage someplace. Not That's not always going to happen, but it does increase the risk that a person will develop those disorders or develop symptoms of those disorders when they get older. So those are the two major ones, environmental and the physiological risk factors. Um, I think that's what I had. That's what I wanted to talk about there with
Yeah,
that.
thank you. And it's so true, and I'm glad that you did mention of a child who sees a parent responding to adverse situations in a particular way. It's if they see it over and over again, they will, um, just a natural thing. They'll just pick that up and they start to respond that way as well. So it's really, very important to mention that. So thank you so much. Um, so, and also just thank you for your time tonight. And we're recording this. Well, it's 7:30 here in New Jersey. But so thank you so much for your time tonight. And I appreciate you sharing your knowledge and the information about the anxiety disorders. Again, this episode is, just to raise awareness about mental health diagnoses and what they mean, and just to share information and to educate people about these terms that we often hear just thrown around, and what they can actually mean, that they actually have meaning, and diagnostic criteria to that needs to be met in order to have a diagnosis. So I appreciate you, Troy, for your time, and thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the OurView Podcast. Leave us a review wherever you listen and let us know what you liked about this episode. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and be sure to follow us on all social media platforms for more disability-related content at OurView for Life. That's OurView, the number 4, LIFE. If you listen to this episode on your phone, take a screenshot and post it to your Instagram or Facebook stories and be sure to tag us. We thank you for listening and take care.